Hello and welcome to another How to Wow video. I'm Nicole Watt, the Pixel Maven at Pixel Maven's Retreat. In this video, I'll be sharing with you how I added some stitch details to this 3x3 card. And you can see I did just a little bit of stitching right here up the side of this little quilt pattern. And I'm going to show you how I did that without a sewing machine. And it's something very quick that you can do if you're not inclined to sew but you like the look of stitching, or if you'd like to use some thicker thread instead of just a single piece of thread like this uses baker's twine. So I'm going to show you how I accomplished that. So there's really two ways that you can do this. If you have a die set like this new quilted quilt builder die set from Stampin' Up. It comes with some dies that already have a stitching detail on them, and let me show you what that looks like. So you can see here on this black cardstock that I used just the stitching die cut, not the actual cutout die cut, to get that stitched pattern in here. And the thing about this particular stitch pattern is that the stitches are long, so it works really well. Another way that you can get a stitch pattern is if you use the Stitched Shapes framelits. These also have a stitched pattern in them already, but let me flip this over for you. But the stitch pattern is a little smaller, so I'm going to show you a few tricks on how you can make that work even with this smaller stitching. And then the third way is to use your good old ruler and piercing mat and piercing tool to make just a line and stitch. So let's start with that, since I've got it kind of set up here. So basically all I did here was I aligned my ruler where I wanted it, and every 1/4 inch mark I went ahead and added a hole. And I was pretty firm about the hole. You want them to be big enough that they show up on the back side, so you can get your thread through. So I did this a little more hastily, but this first one I really took the time to make sure I was lined up, got my face right close to it, and then just made these dots so that way I had a nice line. Okay, so once you have your stitching, instead of using a needle and thread, because with thicker baker's twine it can be hard to get through the eye of a needle, and if you use a larger needle sometimes the eye is really wide and it will break through these holes. So what I'm using is just a needle threading tool that is just it's just nylon, and you can see if I pull this apart it's just gonna break, which is fine. They come in these packs of like a bajillion of them. For relatively cheap, and they last like forever. So I just take one of these and I just figure out, so I'm on the back side now, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this right through the hole and kind of grab it on the other side, and then thread my baker's twine through that big hole, which is, you know, this is great because you don't have to have really dexterous hands, you just need to keep getting them through the holes. And then I'm going to just gently pull that through, and then I flip it over and I put this back in, and then thread it through again. So you can see that I end up with a really nice stitched line. It's nice and thick with this thick baker's twine, so you can really see it well, and you can just make this as long as you need it to be. Alright, so with this one, like I said, the cuts from the die are wide enough that I can do the same thing. So even though they're a little flat instead of circular in shape, this happens to fit through still nicely. There we go. It's a little tighter, but the same thing applies as I pull the string right out. So that's another tip. If you're not used to sewing, you want to make sure that you're leaving yourself enough lead on the back that it'll go through. So let me pull that one back through the beginning here. Again, it just goes right into that hole. and it pulls right through. So now I've got that through again. There we go. And I'm run this stitch through and pull gently. So at this point, you see it wants to pull this one through, so I'm just going to put my thumb here, and now it will only pull the one side. And then I will turn it over, find my hole again, and if it won't go through, like I'm having some problems there, then you can use the tip that I have for the smaller stitched shapes, which is to then take your piercing tool after you've cut out the shape and just give it a little nudge very gently to widen that hole. And the nice thing about that is you're not really going to see that the hole is wider because your thread is going to cover that whole thing up. See how that went through much nicer. So again, I'll just pull this through. There we go. Once you have a stitch or two in place, it doesn't want to pull from the other side, so you don't have to worry about holding that out of the way. Now, I wouldn't recommend this if you had a whole bunch that you wanted to stitch. I mean, unless you really wanted to do something gorgeous, maybe one of a kind for someone who is really special and you wanted to stitch this whole thing. That would be probably really, really beautiful. But it might take you a little bit of time. But to do just a few stitches to add something like I did here in this design, that takes me just a few minutes or less to just get those 2 or 3 stitched through, and then you're good to go. So another reason to do it this way is maybe you want something curved and I just want to have a little bit of an accent, so I'm only going to do maybe 5 or 6 stitches and then let this poke out behind another element. Then it would be really nice. You'd be able to see that little bit of stitching poking out like so. So that's some reasons why you may want to do this method instead of using a sewing machine if you're already an avid sewer, or at least know enough to be able to run a machine and do a few stitches on a card if you'd like. So that's my tip for today, and I hope to see a few little stitching accents on some of your projects in the future. If you do happen to try this technique, do tag your project with the hashtag #PMRCraftMaven, and I will find you out on social media and share you and your design with all of my followers. Until next time, happy crafting.